Hi, I'm Deanna Springer.
And I'm Denise Abel with another fun Stitch It Sisters sewing project and classic time-saving tips by Nancy Zieman.
First, let's take a look at the project we're making today. It's our winter Snowflakes mini wall quilt. We've again combined machine embroidery and paper piecing techniques to make our wall quilt. We'll be adding our new snowflake embroidery designs to our quilt blocks, and we'll also be sharing embellishing options. We'll be making our project with Riley Blake shades,
Our brand new quick quilting in the hoop winter snowflakes, our Clover mini iron, fusible mesh stabilizer, and size 90 embroidery needles. And stitching our winter snowflake mini wall quilt couldn't be easier with Stitch It Sisters' easiest sewing techniques.
Before we begin making our mini wall hanging, we need to cut our fabrics and prepare our fabrics for the cutting. So we steam and press at the ironing board and give a little spritz of spray starch. That will help ensure the fabrics are ready for cutting and stitching.
And you see in front of us at the cutting board and above it, we have our 5-inch crosswise fabric strips that we've taken from the fabrics of the shades. And we are now going to be cutting that fabric strip into squares. So 5-inch squares come from 5-inch fabric strips. We're going to cut them crosswise, half square triangles for the outer triangles. And then we also cut into quarters for our inner triangles.
And we also have a 4-inch strip that we'll use for the center, that will be cut into squares for the center.
Yes. And you can see out in front of us, we also have all of our stacked up triangles and squares all ready to go, because then it makes assembly really easy with the quilt blocks right in front of you.
And all of those instructions are included with the project, so no need to remember. We step it all out for you, and it's a wonderful process.
So let's talk about the designs. In the book and in the collection, we've included 24 embroidery designs, and that includes our quilt blocks, our snowflakes, and our pre-merged quilt blocks with the snowflakes. And Deanna has in front of her 2 quilt block options that we have included with the collection. This is our square in a square, and also we have the square on point. And this is great for showcasing the snowflakes. What we're going to be doing today is using the square in a square, and we're going to piece the intersection as if it was a whole center of white, but I like the additional piecing that it gives.
You like that texture background, so where you see blue, that will be white.
And in with the collection, you're going to be receiving files for printing templates. And that templates are optional. They come as a PDF, no software required. They are 100% accurate representations of your embroidery designs, and it shows the roadmap here. And what you need to do first is select your design size and your embroidery hoop. So in front of Deanna, she has the 5-inch, the 6-inch, and the 8-inch blocks. And we're going to use the 6-inch hoop and the 6-inch block then.
So we've selected the middle size.
And now we're going to the machine and we are going to select our embroidery design. I have the designs from the download loaded to a USB flash drive, inserted in the machine. And today, Deanna, I'd like to talk about merging. We have them pre-merged designs, so you don't have to do any merging, no software. But if you would like to have your own design merged with one of our blocks, you can certainly do that by taking our plain block and merging a decorative design. And what a nice idea would be to have a coordinating quilt block on the back, or quilt label on the back of your quilt using that block. So we're going to go to the machine with the USB flash drive. Then we're going to bring up the embroidery and we're going to merge our designs. So first we're going to select the map of the quilt block. This is our construction block, and we're going to easily press the plus button and bring in our snowflake. This merging is so easy on the Bernina. And then we are ready to sew. Let's talk a little bit about our embroidery thread. We've got it threaded on the machine, and we have selected an embroidery needle and thread that is good for construction, and as well as the embroidery design itself. And I chose blue because it's going to contrast from the white stabilizer so we can see our roadmap. And you know, the number one question I get with the technique when I start showing is, but aren't those lines and numbers going to show on my quilt block? Not at all. They're hidden in the seam allowance, so you don't have to worry about that showing.
They're camouflaged right below the fabric and you don't see them.
Right. And let's talk about the stabilizer. We have the fusible mesh stabilizer in the hoop here on the machine, and I've trimmed it a little bit for the camera, but Deanna has our stabilizer on the roll, and you can see one side has a sheen to it.
A little bit of sheen, and that's where the glue is, that heat activated glue that will baste our blocks down as we're working on them, our fabric pieces. So to hoop your stabilizer, we have a two-part hoop, a outer hoop and an inner hoop.
And on the inner hoop, I've applied Sewer's Fix-It tape just to give a little bit of a grip to hooping the stabilizer. It's just one layer of stabilizer being hooped. We're not hooping fabric today.
So we'll insert the inner hoop into the outer hoop with a little bit of tension and just tighten it into place.
And Deanna is using the hooping mat underneath just to give like a third hand. You don't have to chase your hoop around your area because it's a silicone grip mat.
It's super flexible, it rolls up for ease of storage, but it keeps your hoop from walking around on the table.
And then we can start our embroidering. We are first going to embroider out the block with our roadmap for the piecing. So here we go. Okay, and there's our, what we traditionally call our first color change, but since we're constructing, we're not really changing colors, but the machine stops because you need to do something when that happens. And you can see from the embroidered roadmap, we have a center block, which is block or area number 1 to position our fabric. So here comes our 4-inch pre-cut or cut fabric square. And we're positioning it right over that center square. And here's where the magic comes in, because we're going to be using Clover's mini iron to position our fabric in place to create the block.
And the mini iron is just that, a mini iron. It heats up and it'll activate that glue to baste it to the back of that fabric square. But we don't want to iron right onto our machine bed. So we use a pot holder.
So this just slides right underneath the embroidery hoop.
And we've attached a tail to it, sort of a 1/4 yard of fabric, just as a reminder, hey, that pot holder is underneath the hoop, and we don't want to leave it under there when we stitch the next step.
Otherwise, we'll be stitching our pot holder to our quilt block. And we're going to take our fabric square with the right side facing up for the first color. And I position it down, and to make sure that it's square and make sure that I have even coverage of that area, I can actually feel the stitching lines. So then I take the Clover mini iron and I start out in the very center, warming up the fusible glue on the stabilizer. And maybe I shouldn't call it glue, maybe fusible is the best.
It's fusible glue, sure, sure. That it's activated with heat. So now it's adhering that fabric to the foundation stabilizer.
So it's not a tacky glue, it's fusibly activated. And then we're going to go with our second color, or our next step, and embroider and stitch that fabric in place. Okay, there's our first step in creating our block. Deanna is showing the stitched block there on her sample. And what we're going to do next is put right sides of fabric to right sides. And we're going to go to section number 2. So we take the right side of our fabric, position it down, and position the triangle right at that stitched line. We're just guiding it right along that
On
line.
the stitched line. I'm a traditional piecer, so I was aligning the edges.
And that's common to think about, but the guides that the machine stitches is exactly where you want to align. And you'll see that the placement is very easy. It just fits right in the center of that block. And now we'll stitch our third stitching line. And I like to take the Clover's point-to-point turner, slightly hold the fabric in place. And remember, we put right sides to right sides of fabric, just like traditional quilting. So now we're going to flip. And that is going to expose our right side. And one trick I like to use with Clover's fabric pressing pen is to run a line along the seam.
And it just puts a little bit of fabric folding liquid right at that seam, which makes it super easy to open that seam.
Gives a really nice crisp finish. And then we're going to fuse our triangle in place. And of course, remove the pot holder and stitch again. And then we move to section 3. Again, right sides to right sides, positioning our triangle so that it's centered. And we can start the machine again. And we continue the process of stitching, flipping, ironing, and stitching once again to fill in our quilt square. Positioning our fourth area, and now we stitch.
And we're getting familiar with the process. We stitch and open the seam and fuse with a mini iron. Fuse that triangle in place. And now it will stitch the outer edge of that triangle.
And on to our last inner triangle.
So this is forming the square within the square. We have that inner square, and now with this fourth triangle, we have a square around the inner square.
So we stitch, and then we flip. We can put the fabric folding pen solution
right along that fold line where that fabric was going to fold. And then it makes a nice open seam.
Nice and flat and crisp. And we fuse down. And I like to work from the fold to the outer edges. And stitch one last time for the inner triangles. Now the inner triangles are complete all the way around. Now we start with our outer triangles, our 4 outer triangles, and this is section 6. So we'll be placing right sides to right sides along that angled seam. And I like to make sure that it's centered by starting with the center of our stitch seams below and looking at the square within. You have like a shape of an L, and if it's equal on both sides, you know that your triangle is centered. And we stitch and then we can apply the folding solution. Use our point-to-point turner, just helps form that a little bit more. And then we take our mini iron, starting from the fold and working out.
So now we're into the outer square within a square, and we're starting to add our blue triangles.
And then the machine is preparing for section number 7. Again, we align our outer triangle. We have that even L shape at the inner block, and we are ready to stitch. So we stitch and then we fold. And another option would be to use the other end of the point-to-point turner to just give it like a little finger press, but with the tool. And of course, we need
our pressing
pot holder,
surface.
starting at the fold again and working out.
And the block is really starting to come together.
And then we stitch again. Wait, what did I do?
You caught it just in time.
1 stitch in. That's all it can do.
Good reminder.
And then we have area number 8, our second to last triangle here, centering. It's ready to stitch. And then pressing surface, stitch and flip. A little help under the needle here, under the foot. But it's great that the clover iron fits right underneath. It slides right underneath the embroidery machine's foot. Remove our surface and start once more. And then our last triangle goes into section 9. We're centered and stitch. We flip one more time. I'm going to just give a little finger press. Iron down our triangle.
Remove our pressing pad.
And stitch again. Now the construction is done. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to stitch an outer perimeter stitch that goes all the way around the block, and that actually gives us our cutting guide. And what I like to do is to keep everything nice and flat. Is take our Sewer's Fix-It tape. It has to be a 101 uses in the sewing room.
And it just holds those seam allowances down and out of the way when you do your final stitch around.
And then we can stitch one more time. And we have our finished block.
In the hoop, and my virtual sample, or my sample as well, in the hoop outside of the machine. And we've stitched all the way around that block, and now we're ready to trim. Actually, if you want to, you could move on and use this for pieced quilt blocks. We want to add a snowflake design though.
So it's already merged in like we did at the machine. So it's ready to just start stitching that beautiful decorative satin stitch snowflake. And voila, our block and our embroidery are complete.
It looks beautiful, and it's all integrated into that one easy design, from the piecing to the embellishing. Up next,
We're going to take the block out of the embroidery hoop and we're going to trim it. So just like traditional quilting, we do some trimming, and the 1/8 inch on this 6.5 inch ruler works perfectly to align with our outer stitching, our outermost stitching line as a guide. And it's the 1/8 inch line. So we trim and cut as you see on the lower sample here. And why do we do 1/8 inch? It's because when you use your scant 1/4 inch or 1/4 inch quilt or piecing, that all of those outer lines are hidden.
it's basting stitches within the seam allowance, hiding. So we make as many blocks as we'd like, and then we cut them apart, and up next is the stitching. So this is more like traditional piecing now.
We're putting right side to right side. There's our two different blocks starting our mini quilt. Right sides to right sides together. And then with our 1/4 inch quilt pressing foot, we seam the two blocks together.
And seam as many blocks as you like together.
And in our sample here, you're going to see our mini quilt hanging upside down. And it's on a pressing surface. And we have it on the perfect embroidery pressing cloth that has a nap to it. And with our designs upside down, there's no chance of crushing the beautiful satin stitching that you have with your embroidery designs. Or the fill stitches as well can get crushed if you're ironing them on the right side. So the plush or the nap of the perfect pressing cloth hides those stitches in the depth while you're getting a nice flat press on your fabrics. And as well as your fabrics, you're going to want to press open our seam allowances. We have 2 seam allowances here, and Deanna pressed it with a little steam, and now we have the tailor's clapper, which I like to call the quilter's clapper. And what the clapper does, it absorbs the heat and the steam from the ironing into the block, so you get really flat, crisp layers of your quilt block.
The seam allowances open right up, and it's nice and flat and smooth for the next step. And the next step would be to layer this with your batting and your backing fabric, and you could add borders if you'd like and make your mini wall hanging a little bit bigger. We chose to just bind the mini wall quilt with a little binding. You'll see in the finished image, it's just spectacular with the 3 blocks and a little bit of binding. And you'll find all those binding instructions at stitchesisters.com and also in the book of the collection.
Yes, and if you do want to add the borders, we've included those instructions as well. A lot of good end quilting information is given in the book.
Also in the book are embellishing ideas.
Yes, we're not done just here with our stitching. We want to highlight some of our special embellishing techniques. So first we're looking at our finished satin stitch snowflakes that we finished just a moment ago, and we're highlighting the satin stitching of the snowflakes. You can see that the light just shimmers off of the embroidery thread, and it's a beautiful satin stitch snowflake design using just the embroidery thread. And then our next block you see here, we've applied hot fix crystals. And using the hot fix crystals and a heat applicator wand adds a little bling to your quilt blocks. The various tips included with the wand are used with various crystal sizes to secure those crystals in place. It heats up the activated glue on the back of the crystals, and when they're securely positioned and heat set, they're absolutely washable and dryable. And then we have our block with our metallic thread. We have our blue metallic thread here stitched out, and you can see there had a little bit more sparkle to your satin stitch snowflakes in the blue embroidery thread that's with metallic. So just a little hint about using metallic thread. You want to insert a metallic needle size 80-12. And that elongated eye and enlarged groove of that needle is for trouble-free embroidery with metallic thread. And also a hint is using a vertical spool pin on your sewing machine, or you can certainly use a single spool thread stand so that the thread has a distance to unwind and relax. And you'll see with our last example here, our fabric colors are reversed for our coaster that's included in with the instructions of the book. And we've chose a silver metallic thread to absolutely embellish this quilt block all the way. And we're using our quilting design, one of our quilting designs, to embellish that block.
And those quilting designs work great within your block. If you don't want a satin stitched a snowflake block, you could use that quilting stitch and do every other block, say in a larger wall hanging. But our mini wall hanging looks beautiful today. It looks wonderful on the wall, and it's also beautiful on a table. We hope you've enjoyed the Stitch It Sisters project. You'll find this embroidery design collection, along with a limited number of project bundle boxes, at stitchitsisters.com.
Be sure to tune in again for another Stitch It Sisters sewing adventure.
In the meantime, connect with Stitch It Sisters and friends on our social sites. Stitch It Sisters is made possible by Bernina, Clover, Pellon, Riley Blake Designs, OESD, Oklahoma Embroidery Supply and Design, and shopnzp.com.
Bernina, made to create.